Hello everyone and welcome to the Hobby Guard. In today's video I will be making a review of the episode 1 of the series, what's it called? Penitent, I believe. The new Warhammer Plus series about the Adepta Sororitas, and episode 1 is titled Covenant. Now the reason I am making this video is not because I ran out of ideas for content. No. I have ideas galore, believe me. But I've been thinking about Warhammer Plus for years now, because originally I did not subscribe to the service because of the way it was launched. I think just how the community and legal team at Games Workshop went about that whole situation was atrocious, honestly, and it basically just crippled the Warhammer community, the Warhammer fan animation community specifically, and it did a ton of damage, basically irreparable damage for all we know, until things changed. Because in case you're not aware, what happened back in the day is we used to have a lot, well, maybe not as much, it was still, Warhammer is still somewhat niche, and even still was back in the day, even though it's become a lot more mainstream. But not to go through the whole story, but basically we had some independent animators who were doing amazing short films and fan films about Warhammer, and GW basically, this was a lot more nuanced and there was a lot to it. There was a lot of different cases and scenarios with different creators, but basically what happened is they gave them a cease and desist from creating any sort of Warhammer content, and told them the only way for you to, some of them, not even all of them, some of them were told the only way for you to continue doing Warhammer animations is to come over and work for us, basically. Under which conditions? Well, we don't know. There's probably some sort of non-disclosure agreement, NDI, that they had to sign, so I'm not too aware of what are the conditions that they were made to come work at GW for. That being said, even though that whole situation was atrocious, and I say irreparable damage because back in the day there was so much passion put into a lot of these projects, and there is a few animators still nowadays just working on passion projects and doing an amazing job, and I'll certainly would like to give them some spotlight at some point in this channel. But long story short, Warhammer Plus launched originally a few years ago, and it was very lackluster. They have produced a few great animations, I would say, but originally their catalog wasn't really all that good, to be honest. There wasn't, for a monthly paid subscription, there wasn't all that much content to really justify an entire monthly subscription, in my very humble opinion. So I did consume some of the stuff that was there. Mind you, it didn't even launch in all countries, so back when I was in Mexico I couldn't even watch it, so I was depending on other means to get my hands on some of these shows, and I did watch a few of them. Some were better than others, and some are absolutely horrific in regards to animation and writing and everything and just tone. But I also think that there's good projects and there is good work here and there. So again, I'd like to talk more about these projects, sort of to give props to the writing team, the animation team, the basically the production that worked on these shows, and just to put my voice out there. So, my humble opinion, as I said, as to what's good Warhammer content and what is bad. They kind of rely on us to give them feedback, even if they don't want to listen to it, because at the end, sure, GW owns the company, but they don't own the fandom. They don't own the hobby. They only own the name and title and the IP, but not the entire hobby as a whole. So, well, that being said, as I mentioned, there are some shows that I think really managed to capture some of the stories and themes that I like in my Warhammer fiction. I guess all Warhammer is fiction, but in my Warhammer stories, in my Warhammer narratives. For example, I love Angels of Death. You might agree or disagree, but I think it's a pretty good show. I liked some of the Hammer and Bolter stories stuff, specifically the latter ones, like Return to Cadia. I thought that was a great episode. In any case, in today's episode, as I mentioned, finally 4 minutes into the video, I'm getting into the topic of the video, we have Penitent. Again, I think it's called, I should really double check that. Yeah, of course. As I said, it is called Warhammer Penitence. As I said, as you heard me say multiple times before, you did not hear me say Warhammer Penitent, because that would be stupid. It's not called Penitent, that makes no sense. Of course I know what I'm talking about, otherwise I wouldn't be making a video about it, you probably heard wrong. But it is called Warhammer Penitence, obviously, duh. So anyways, I did not totally just open up my browser and look it up real quick. So this show, the characters on the show and what it is centered around, centered around a squad of Adeptas Sororitas that are in a sacred holy mission, a pilgrimage if you will, to carry the remains of their former canoness, to a sacred shrine that they may be forever remembered and serve as a beacon of hope to the Imperium. Now, I can't tell you much more of the story. That's basically the premise of the show. Something goes horribly wrong, their vessel gets shot down, and only a few of them survive, and that's as far as I'm willing to go into specific spoilers, but half spoiler warning if you're considering watching the show. I highly recommend you find out more. I won't go into specifics as exactly what happens. It's a fairly short episode too, and there's not too many things to spoil, but more so I want to talk about the tone and the animation. Again, a sort of review, if you will, about this episode. And right here in this frame you can see they, in my very humble opinion, they are absolutely nailing the aesthetic, and throughout the episode rather, they nail the aesthetic of the sororitas. I think just the lighting, the proportions of the armor, the animations of the characters. Let's discuss real quickly what I think is a good show, basically in Warhammer. What is a good narrative, a good story? And some authors or screenwriters or whatever are better at some things than others, better at some types of stories than others. But I believe that as long as they capture the tone, maybe the story doesn't have the best narrative cohesion, maybe it doesn't has the best conflict and the best resolutions, perhaps, narratively speaking, dramaturgically speaking, if you will, if you treat this as theater, right? But if the tone is right, then I consider the intention of the show to be good, and if what they're going after is right, then I consider the intention to be good. Obviously there are also technical aspects. In my opinion, the animation looks great for this episode, for this show, and animations have been getting a lot better, except for a few here and there that are still atrocious. But again, I think these, unlike some other animations like that Femstore is one that I absolutely abhor, this does a good job of capturing the whole vibe of the sororitas. When I think of the Adeptas Sororitas, I think of the archetypal holy warrioress, basically, right? The warrior nun, this woman that is so possessed by a fiery faith, a fiery conviction, that she is willing to go through all sorts of trials to see the will of her church basically through, to see the will of her faith, to see through her commitment to her faith rather, to live up to the standards of what she has faith on. And I think that's a beautiful story, man, woman, whatever you are. I think that is part of who we are as humans in the end. I think all good stories have an element of that, just characters trying to live up to their ideals. So again, going back to the aesthetics of the show, the photography in it, the cinematography in it is, I just liked it a lot. It has this very warm, Khalid, is that a word in English? I don't think so. I'm thinking of cálido, a word in Spanish, sorry about that. But let's just say warm tone, right? But it's not like a cozy warm, it's more like a rugged, rough, alien kind of warm, think rusted colors. But it's not only about the materials and the metal, but also the world that they end up landing on, or the world that they are on, actually. It seems like I don't know too much about the story again, but it seems like a world it looks like an alien world, an inhospitable almost world, either that or that has been so ravaged by war and by just exposure to the cosmic elements, that I think it's a nice setting. Now the characters themselves, I think they are a good balance between the femininity, the like sort of this sacred archetypal femininity of these icons that are the Adeptus Sororitas, because on one hand they are icons and standards of the faith, of the church, and in another hand, it's not called the church, I think, in Warhammer, but you know, of the Imperial Creed, if you will. And in another hand, they are zealous, brutal fighters. They are basically, if it was D&D, they would be zealot barbarians, right? Like a combination between a barbarian and a paladin, so to speak. They can be absolutely brutal and very punishing to those that they deem unworthy of the Emperor's mercy and the Emperor's compassion. So I think that's a beautiful balance, this sort of inflexibility, and I love that about Warhammer, actually, that to have such a strong faith in your convictions, such strong belief, and to be so strongly dedicated to your own faith that you are willing to be completely inflexible. I think that's pretty cool in Warhammer, okay? Before all the alarmists that cannot separate fiction from real life here and there jump on my throat. Listen, here's what I believe, and here's what I think this show does very well, actually. Everything has two sides, right? There's two sides to every coin, so to speak. And Warhammer is a world, is a universe of an IP, if you will, or a fictional universe, let's call it, of extremes. And that's just the nature of it, right? So the bad will be absolutely horrible, and the good will shine even more so because of that. There will be less of it because this is grimdark, but it's also nice when stories manage to find the balance. And balance, mind you, much like in painting, does not mean 50% of everything, does not mean everything is equal. There's an equal percent of jokes to like serious moments, to like silly moments, to like happy moments, to like dark moments. No, that's not what balance means. Think of a painting, as I was mentioning in one of my previous videos, chiaroscuro, right? This ancient technique or tenebrism. These old techniques from the Renaissance, where like the painters would create this huge contrast of dark and light in their paintings, and that would just make the light pop a lot more because everything else was so dark. And going back to the Renaissance, this, like, if I just go through the frames in this show, that's why I'm praising the cinematography of the animation. There's Renaissance vibes in the aesthetic of it, and in the illumination of it, and the lightning of it. I don't know very well the terms in English. I don't know how to say it. I might be wrong. That's just how I perceived it. I might just be doing too many favors to the show just because, I am a very gullible person, and I am a hoe for Warhammer content, unfortunately. But anyways, another reason I forgot to say, by the way, I wanted to make reviews of this is, again, it is a very expensive service. I don't think it's necessarily worth it to be that expensive. It does have a bunch of stuff, but not everything is for everyone, and money is tight. It's a very expensive hobby, let's just admit it. And yes, the company absolutely milks their customers. So yeah, if anyone's thinking about getting a Warhammer subscription on top of everything else that's going on in the hobby and how expensive it is, I would like them to be well informed as to what they might hope to find. But going back to the Adeptus Sororitas and this animation, if you look at the aesthetic of the characters and the character design, I think they kind of nailed it. They're not shying too much away from their femininity, which is one of my fears. Of course, these characters look rugged, but not all of them do, and there is a balance because one of the main characters here in the show is they're not called aspirants, a noviciary, what are they called? Like an initiate, but she's not quite there in the Adeptus Sororitas. Sorry, I'm not huge into their lore, just whenever I come across them in the books that I read, but I love them as a faction, absolutely. Whereas the other more senior full-on Sisters of Battle, well, they are a lot more rugged, right? And I think this dynamic of like them perhaps more hopeful, more innocent, more naive, clearly less tough than the others, at least in regard to her combat experience, and how she balances out with this like very rugged kind of Sisters of Battle, who you can just tell they've been doing war for years, and they look like they just got pulled out of the trenches to go on this mission because they're on edge at all times. And fair enough, they're still in a battle zone, they're in a horrible circumstance, right? But going back to the whole two sides of the coin in everything, and the faith in Warhammer. And by the way, small parenthesis here, what I'm gonna say, I think it's one of the biggest failures in current Warhammer narratives and just stories that get put out, is to find again, going back to the balance in the Imperial Creed, in the Church of the Emperor, the whole Imperial belief of the God Emperor of mankind. Sorry, the name just escaped me now, but it's the Ecclesiarchy and the Adeptus Ministorum, or the Ministorum rather. Is it Adeptus Ministorum? I don't remember. Sorry, I'm a nerd, but I'm not a dork. No, wait, the other way around. I'm a dork, but I'm not a nerd. I'm not too smart, is what I'm trying to say. Even if I am autistic. Anyways, as I was saying, there's two sides to it, right? On one hand, you have the zealotry. On one hand, you have the extremism. Sorry, I'm still learning English. And on the other hand, you have the more noble aspects of faith, right? When characters that are stuck in horrible situations that basically make the worst come out of them, and they have to turn into like basically not necessarily evil people, but they have to commit evil acts all the time just to survive. On one hand, there is that, and whenever those characters remember that they are also serving the greater purpose of mankind, that they also have compassion for other humans in their hearts, I think that's cool as long as it's not done too much. And what I mean by that is compassion in Warhammer is something very specific, and I've been complaining about how cartoonish the stories have become and how much lighter the tone in the stories have become. And this is what I mean by it. In this universe, what to you and me is compassion, it must look entirely different. What are good acts for you and me? What are things that make sense, that make us good people, good humans? In Warhammer, it is something completely different because it's a fictional universe. It's grimdark, and characters are expected to act in a different way. Because again, these are characters that are in horrible situations, and the idea of it is, if any human got put in those situations, we would probably have to adapt pretty quickly to that reality. And those who try to act, basically to apply our modern values to this fictional, horrific, grimdark universe, they should be smoked like that. And I think the modern stories are doing a horrible job of that for the most part. I wouldn't say for the most part, but it's certainly more and more permanent, and sort of like the boiling frog, it gets worse with every story. They just get lighter and lighter and less serious, because you can tell how our modern values, how these writers cannot comprehend that you can write a cool story about characters that are morally wrong if you compare them with your own moral compass, but it doesn't matter. That shouldn't matter, because they are not real characters, and the reality is not your reality, and you should not project your own moral compass, your own morality onto them, but rather you should focus on what it is that makes them human. And more to the point, these Sisters of Battle have to find, at least in this episode, they have to find the balance between, and this is what I appreciate so much so far about the show, between being zealous, being, having a burning fire inside them that pushes them to fulfill their duty, while at the same time that is pushing them through an actual war zone where they are being harassed by very dangerous, very powerful enemies, and yet they are still human, right? So they are still sisters, so to speak. They are still all part of the same faith, and they believe that their humanity is sacred, perhaps not the individual, but as a whole. And so they need to find a balance in between that, right? Those two extremes, which are both necessary, and we get to see a bit of that in this very short episode of this show. I think the episode is like 15 minutes long, so don't expect like a huge entire drama. But good stories tell themselves sometimes and often without words. That's why there's morons in the internet like myself to talk about them in length, probably longer than the actual episode. Why would you watch a 20-minute review about a 15-minute episode? Oh, dear Emperor, I've done it again. But anyways, that's why they have people like me, basically. That's why there are people like me, so we can over-explain something that you're supposed to absorb just intuitively with your own sensibilities by just exposing yourself to the story. Now, going back to the lighting, see how cool these frames are. I think they really did a good job of capturing the grimdark essence. I will say, these warm, like desaturated warm filters that some shows have used in the past, sort of like this one, they can get too much at times, but that's a minor complaint, all things considered. Now, finally, let's address the question in everyone's mind. Is this show woke? Because it's a show about women, not only women, but warrior women and girl bosses at that. And some people will care about it because they want it to be woke, some people will care about it because they don't want it to be woke. And I'm just here to tell you, I try to come into these things with an open mind, as open as I can, except the female custodies one. There are no female custodies, there will never be. I will die on the kill. But anyways, I thought it was pretty okay. The characters here are certainly not overpowered, at least I don't think. There's some outrageous stuff going on, obviously. There's stuff that's like, okay, she should probably be dead by now, with those wounds and everything. But we don't know, man. It's the 41st millennium. They might have all sorts of healing technology that we don't know about. But anyways, I don't think it's necessarily like a girl boss kind of show, because again, it is showing their humanity, it is showing their frailty, it is showing their weaknesses, and it also shows their conviction and their strength, and how their strength comes from their discipline and conviction, right, and their own faith. And I think that is just a cool theme specifically for this faction, because the Sisters of Battle are all about faith and fire, So anyways, I just think this show is managing to capture that well. I absolutely, again, really like the cinematography, like the art, the artistic balance, and like the frame. Just look at these frames. I really like them. I think they're beautiful. I don't know how else to say it. I think they capture the femininity and vulnerability of the Adeptas Sororitas, just covered and protected by a shield of faith, an armor of faith, an armor of contempt, if you will, which I think it's pretty metal. It gives the whole nuns with gun vibes. Could they be crazier? Yes, I think they have been a lot smooth. They have been very smooth out, like their aesthetic. If you compare it to the good old, I don't know, Adrian Smith or John Blanche days, I think they were a lot more glam back in the day, for sure. But it is what it is. That's just Warhammer nowadays. It's back in the day we had some very silly kind of toy soldiery Warhammer happen, and now we have just sometimes very smooth, clean, tactical aesthetic to our Warhammer characters. And we can complain about it all we like, and I certainly do, but just it is what it is. Some days when people stop buying the product as much, they'll try to go back and feed on our nostalgia to a more rugged look and aesthetic for these factions and these characters. That being said, I still think it's a nice balance. The show feels very like feminine, empowering in the good way of it, not in the way it's like, oh, they're cool because they're women. No, it's like, yeah, these women, they're badasses, not because they're women, but because they're badasses, and they're also perhaps horrible people within, because they're zealots of a terrible faith. But in this universe, they are the heroes, and I just think that's pretty cool. It's sort of like getting to know better your school bully. Like sometimes when you have a school bully, you are like thinking, oh, he's gonna be the worst person in the world, whatever. But then you actually find more about him, and turns out that he gets beaten up at home, right? And that's why he had to become so rough. That's sort of like literally everyone in Warhammer. I know this got very dark very quickly, so I'll just leave it there for now. How about that? And I'll let you decide. I would love to read your opinions in the comments down below. Perhaps with this video being so long, I should have gone into spoilers, but it is what it is. I'll perhaps make more videos as the show carries on. I'm already paying for it just so you don't have to, so I might as well make content out of it. And if you do choose to watch this show, please let me know in the comments down below. Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think this is absolutely modern politics slop with girl bosses, or do you think this is a good attempt at capturing the essence of our nuns with guns? Sorry, voice crack. Our nuns with guns. With that being said, thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. Remember, there are no female custodies at Astra. And I'll see you on the next one.